We are going to talk about children. It's an area where we have felt helpless for 4 years, and it is definitely not for today for us to find solutions. People are piecemeal trying to find solutions, moderating, mediating, getting, occasional contacts just to get their children back. But the fact is that Russia has built an administrative system of abduction and erasing all Ukrainian from these children's minds. And we are not able to respond to that systemically. I'm really trying to understand one thing. Some people say it's 18,000 children. Some people say it's 35,000 children. What's the reality? And of course, there are so many different ways. I mean, Russia calls it all evacuation. There are children who have been taken from occupied territories, they say, to the safe places. I mean, who knows? How is the world seeing it? I mean, we know how ICC has been seeing it, but it's an inefficient way of managing it. So how do we know, first and foremost, what's the situation on the ground? And who wants to maybe answer that? I will come back to Kajsa, you, when we talk about what action can be taken, because out of all of us, you are the only one who probably has some levers and some screws to turn on all that. So please, who wants to start on that?
Well, if we want to go into the specific question of kidnapped children, I think Kateryna is probably the expert.
Yes, please, Kateryna.
Okay, let's start. First of all, it's a huge honor to be here and to raise this issue one more time. Actually, for already 4 years, we have been discussing the issue of abducted children from different perspectives, including, as you have already mentioned, the crime of Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova of unlawful deportation and forcible transfer, of also the issue of abducted children as a precondition for peace negotiations or lasting and sustainable peace as such. We are also trying to understand what is the intent of the Russian Federation. And I would like to start with answering this question, because actually I see that the main goal of the Russian Federation is just to destroy Ukraine as a sovereign state while abducting our children as our future, but also to subjugate and to eradicate Ukrainian nation. As for numbers, yes, they vary. Because unfortunately, only the Russian Federation knows how many children it abducted. And I would like to highlight that the abduction of Ukrainian children, the forcible transfer of Ukrainian children to Russian families for adoption started not in 2022, but in 2014. So it is already for 12 years for this crime, and unfortunately we don't see any amelioration of the situation. The last case of forcible transfer of Ukrainian children to Russian families for foster care, my organization documented in 2025. So as for numbers, the official statistics provided by Ukraine is 19,546 children recorded as unlawfully deported or forcibly transferred. We also know the number is 35,000. It is a number of the Yale Humanitarian Laboratory, but as far as I know, they are talking about not only children who have been abducted permanently, but also about children who were sent to the so-called re-education camps. As for other numbers, they are provided by Russians themselves, and we are talking about more than 700,000 children who crossed the border of the Russian Federation since 2022. But I would like to attract your attention to the fact that depending on fertility rates, just in 2 generations, we are talking about the loss for Ukraine of around 40,000 people. But if we add to this number 1.5 million Ukrainian children in occupation, this number raises to 3 million people. And Russia is gaining the same number of new Russian citizens, brainwashed, militarized, indoctrinated. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it became clear that Ukrainian children were for the Russian Federation some sort of the solution to their demographic crisis. I suppose that maybe it is because after the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, the Russian Federation recorded a sudden demographic boost. Of course, not biological, but just technical because of the crime of aggression and because of the annexation of the sovereign territory of the other state. Before, Putin was trying to attract migrants and also to attract the so-called compatriots from abroad, but all these policies, they failed. Also because migrants, they were mostly not Russian speakers or don't speak Russian fluently. We know all these limits, including the limitation of access to education for migrants' children in Russia. So everything failed because it doesn't correspond with the vision of the Russian world. In the eyes of the aggression state, Ukrainian children, they are totally different because they are Russifiable. Mm-hmm. And for this, the whole system was created.
Thank you for this clear and wide framework to discuss this issue further. What I'm wondering is, what is the legal status of the children living under occupation in the occupied territories? I mean, we all know that, I mean, for Russians it is nothing new to conscript, I mean, children or people from occupied territories into their army. And it's 4 years now. I mean, those who were children are now almost grown-ups. Some are grown-ups. What's the legal status and how exactly Russia is violating the right of these people on the occupied territories? Because after all, we all know that you shouldn't take people into your military under occupation. Russia has always done that. I have personal experience from Estonia, from Soviet Union time. So where do we stand legally there?
Well, I think there's 2 points that are important here. In terms of the Russian official narrative, children are being abducted for their own protection, right? That is a claim that is being reiterated time and time again, and that children that are in dangerous situations are getting safe homes with Russian families. But if this was a real protection strategy, it would look totally different. It is usually never the preferred option to take a child under threat away from their family and friends, from their social environment. To take them away, you need parental consent. In order to take their citizenship away, to change their citizenship, you need parental consent. So none of the criteria for child protection are being fulfilled. It simply fails the test. And then on top of that, protect from what? To protect from the violence of the occupying power. So the logic is definitely reversed here. And I think what's important there is that this is a strategic approach, right? When you hear child protections, people's emotions kick in. They immediately think about the issue differently. They also think about the war differently. And I think that is the point that I really want to highlight, that this is not necessarily only something that we have to look at from a child rights or humanitarian perspective. Russia is very deliberately targeting Ukrainian children in a number of different ways. Abduction is only one of them. They're also repeatedly destroying schools, maternity wings of hospitals, children's hospitals. So destroying the infrastructure where children grow and build trust. They often target children deliberately. We have a really high number of child casualties among civilian casualties, and that number rises over the years of the war. So in beginning of 2025, there was a 200% increase of child casualties compared to 2024. So this is getting worse. Russia is also using Ukrainian children for intelligence purposes. There's these gaming apps, especially in the beginning of the war, that lead children, manipulate them into sharing photos of their local infrastructure, of military installations, and so on. We also have reports that Russia is now, on a pretty large scale, actually deliberately recruiting Ukrainian children for sabotage acts. And the point is, none of this is unique to this conflict. And I think that is the big threat, that we still don't have any type of strategic countermeasures to this type of activity. Russia is doing it in Ukraine. Assad did it with his own population in Syria. ISIS has done it at a very, very resourceful strategic scale in Syria, Iraq, and now is doing it in many African countries as well. So we're seeing a pattern that's being reiterated over and over again, that destabilizing actors of all kinds, be they dictators, be they extremists, be they terrorist groups, target children specifically because they are more vulnerable, they're easier to overpower, but they also have a higher capacity than we usually think. They're capable of much more than we assume. They embody the future of a society, and this is where Kateryna's point comes in. This is really an attack on the future of Ukraine, more than just an attack on Ukrainian children. But even beyond that, propaganda, indoctrination, and also trauma in childhood has a much more lasting effect than propaganda that is being inflicted on adults. So by also keeping such a large amount of children in the occupied territories, or even repatriating, that's the wrong word, but taking them to Russia, they are making sure that that portion of the Ukrainian generation is getting this Russian intense propaganda. So I think what I also would be interested in discussing with you guys is looking a little bit into what are the future challenges that Ukraine will face because of this strategy that will last even beyond the war.
Absolutely, and we'll certainly come to that when we have discussed how to best get the children back. We need indeed to look into, what's the rehabilitation program seen, and there, I would say, in a way, that would be a tough job, but it can be supported by European Union institutions very well, and it can be done. But first and foremost, what more can be done to get the kids back? And Kajsa, there are of course legal processes, we can protest, whatever. Previously we would have gone to United Nations to ask for a resolution and so on, so on. Now, I think the only point we can turn actually is you, Kajsa, because EU is the only institution who is in charge at least of some levers. Sanction mechanisms, Schengen visa mechanism, crossing the border rights, in any way pestering those people. And we know it's an administrative system, therefore we know there are concrete people. What more could we do in Europe to kind of make it at least uncomfortable for the system to keep running?
Yes, well, thank you. I think you raised very good points on this, because that is exactly what we need to do. Make sure that it is uncomfortable for the system, and also that the world keeps talking about this. So I think raising the issue again and again on the highest political level is really very important. So I think all European leaders, all leaders around the world should continue to raise this topic. It is so fundamental. And it is also, there is actually a resolution that was adopted in the United Nations in December.
Great help.
With the support of the European countries, of course, but also the United States. And we do not always find ourselves on the same side these days. So it is significant that it was adopted, but it doesn't change the situation on the ground for the children. And I think what is really important is that when we look at all the instruments we have, well, it's very frustrating that, of course, none of those instruments will get all the children back as long as the war is raging. Because the only situation that we can imagine in which you could get a large number of those children back is if there is a ceasefire or a peace. And therefore, number one for me is that it has to be part of any ceasefire or peace agreement. There cannot be any compromise on this. It has to be stated very clearly: the children have to be returned to Ukraine. I think that is very, very important. The instruments that we can use while the war is still ongoing is the sanctions, as you mentioned, and the EU has sanctions in place on individuals. More than 100 individuals who have been identified as being responsible for the abduction and forcefully transfer of these children. This is, it's difficult because of there are no contacts, of course, on the Russian side. To obtain this information is difficult, but with the help of Ukraine and several institutions, we have been able to identify those people and to sanction them and to limit and to stop completely, of course, any contacts that they might have with us. So that is an instrument we use. What is also very important is the documentation of all of this. Mm-hmm. And I think in Ukraine there is now really a unique documentation of many atrocities, including the abduction of these children. And we contribute to that financially and with expertise. We have a European civilian mission that is on the ground in Ukraine supporting the Ukrainian authorities, the Prosecutor General's office, to do this. And of course, it's important that the ICC can continue its field work in Ukraine because of the arrest warrant against this commissioner. They apparently call her Commissioner for the Rights of Children. Well, the title couldn't be more wrong. And also, there is actually the Yale Institute for, it's called Humanitarian. The Humanitarian Laboratory that is excellent, that have expertise, technology, and it's been defunded by the US. So I think this is also something where we should look if we could support them because they are unique, as far as I know, in the expertise that they have. So all of this, we need to do, but in the end, there is only one thing that can actually bring the children back, which is the end of the war. And then, of course, and I know in Ukraine they're already working on this, there is the reintegration part of children that have been brainwashed, whose identities really have, they've tried to erase their Ukrainian identity. So also that is very important work that you can start on right now.
May I ask you a follow-up question? I mean, how wide is EU ready to take, this list of people who should be actually accused and therefore, let's say, refuse to have Schengen visas and stuff? I mean, one thing is indeed people who are actually doing this abduction, adoption, organizing all this, but then there is also, regional officials, guardianship authorities, propaganda structures, and all these things. I mean, what's your scope? And I heard already you said it's difficult to obtain information, which is obviously true. On the other hand, I think the risk of maybe sanctioning one person wrongly or otherwise letting thousands off the hook is maybe a lesser damage. So, I mean, can we really follow through with all our legal procedures and be very narrow on this issue? Or are you ready to take it wide as well?
Well, I think it's a very good point. And on the sanctions, and we're now working on the 20th sanction package broadly. And also on the sanctions that are related to human rights violations and specifically targeted at those responsible for the abducted children. Yes, we are far beyond that we can, that we have the luxury of being so precise. And I think that is, I mean, the situation we find ourselves in is that there is complete impunity. And therefore, I would, for my office, Special Representative for Human Rights, be very much in favor of throwing the net out as widely as possible.
What steps are you taking? I don't know. Do you need to get something decided by our Parliament, European Parliament, or I mean, what are the steps we need to take to throw this net wide?
No, I think on the side of the European Parliament, there is support. On the side of the institutions, the European Commission, the President of the European Commission has taken this as a priority, as she stated also in the State of the Union. It's a priority for the High Representative, Kaja Kallas. Many member states have prioritized this and are also funding the ICC and others to do this work. So I don't think it's a question of, that we need some institution to take some step. I think we just need to continue to underline the importance of this, and every new sanction package to see if we can do more.
So we have all the legal things in place which we need to just throw this net wide and also go after.
If anybody has an even better idea, I'm always open to it. But as far as I know, yes.
I see.
Yes, can I just briefly jump in to the discussion, because my organization is working very closely with our European Union partners in order to ensure that all perpetrators who contributed to the abduction, but not exclusively, to the militarization of Ukrainian children also, they're in sanction lists. And we have a huge progress. As for people who are already under sanctions, we are talking about not only Maria Lvova-Belova and her members of her office, but also of regional ombudspersons, including these people who were appointed in occupation. Also, we are talking about heads of some institutions and institutions themselves. For example, some of Russian military patriotic movements were already included into this sanction list, like Unarmia movement, or for example, Artek as a re-education institution. So it was already done. The most important developments from the last year was, first of all, the coordination work between European partners, because the European Union is coordinating its sanction policy, at least on this issue, with partners from Canada and from the United Kingdom, and it makes sanctions more efficient than it was before. And another point is that, if I'm not mistaken, in November last year, the new category to sanction people appeared in the European Union legislation. And it was militarization, indoctrination, and re-education of Ukrainian children under Russian control, including children in occupation. So it is a huge progress, and sanctions work, at least at the medium level. Of course, we understand that it cannot stop Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, even arrest warrants from the side of the ICC were efficient enough in past, and now we should try some other ways in order to ensure that they are ready, at least to speak with us, in order to return abducted children. Because you asked already what we should do in order to make this process more efficient and to return more kids. First of all, we should understand who we are returning. Because as for today, the actual number is 1,967, so around 2,000 children have been returned from the Russian control. But we are talking about not only unlawfully deported and forcibly transferred kids, but also children from occupation, and they should be returned. And all infrastructure should be used in order to guarantee that more children are escaped from the Russian control, because each day in occupation means more crimes against them. But children who were unlawfully deported in 2022, they remain under Russian control. So like 90% of them. And it seems that Russians just treat us as fools, because while they are publicly communicating that they are processing the list of 300 children sent to them by the mediator state or just transferred to them in Istanbul, 42 out of 47 children from the Kherson regional child home, very young children, they were sent to families of the Russian citizens. And we are waiting for their repatriation, but actually how we can ensure it?
This brings me to our next question, actually. And let's imagine that all the 7 work streams and sequences carries fruit, and with some miraculous change in his mind, Russians will also agree to this ceasefire and peace plan. How do we know? Where are these kids? So I think tracking is extremely important. And what are the mechanisms which, I mean, obviously there are no kind of official public mechanisms, but what are the mechanisms we are currently using in order to keep track at least of these children? And it's easier with bigger children, of course, but I mean, precisely with these cases, what are we doing? Or is it a lost cause? Or, I mean, how do you feel?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's very difficult. It also really depends on the child's individual case and situation, right? We've seen accounts of family members that have noticed, because they were living together, that a child was abducted and even traveled after them into Russian territories to get them back. So any situation where there is like a close-knit family around them, I think it's going to be fairly easy to track them back, because they will be identifiable, because there is going to be people that care personally and they know that this person is missing. It's much different when it's about children that are being taken from official institutions or kind of unsafe living conditions, or maybe a single parent household where the parent passed in the war, situations like this. That's also where I think that it's not enough to rely, even though I'm a researcher, so I'm always in favor of, you know, academics being involved in these processes, but I don't think it's enough to rely on open source intelligence in order to track them. We really need this competency, this expertise within official security and intelligence institutions. And I think that's also where there's the biggest gap. And the case of the abducted children, because of the ICC warrant, at least has that kind of like high-level backing. But there is so much violence against Ukrainian children and so many crimes committed that don't quite hit that threshold. That also means that there isn't really anywhere like a master list or a complete overview of all the different types of crimes that Russia commits against Ukrainian children and how those different crimes also interact with each other. And that's definitely a gap that needs to be closed. And I think that's also one of those situations where European support could be very beneficial, make a big difference in terms of resource support, but also in terms of intelligent cooperation, information sharing. There is, I think, enough opportunity out there that we could do more. That's not being used.
Okay, Kajsa, I'm afraid that's for you now to respond to, because indeed your official job title is, I see there are questions coming up as well. Your official job title is human rights rep.
Yes.
But in fact, I feel like you are the only kind of center of competence for finding, tracking, returning the Ukrainian children. I mean, some people are calling for a special body to be created, and I feel you are this special institution now. So what could be done to, I mean, respond to the appeal from her?
Well,
we just heard.
First of all, and I agree, and we also must be aware of that time is not on our side, because children, they grow up, they get older, and some of they start, of course, with very young children. We know that, but some of them have become grown-ups, a large part. I don't know the numbers on this, but we risk sort of having lost them already because, for instance, they are being mobilized, militarized and mobilized. So time is not on our side. We need to do more. There is a lot of coordination now going on between those European institutes that I think can be helpful. So it's the European Union. It's the Council of Europe that is very, very active. And Council of Europe, of course, has specific expertise also on Russia. It's the OSCE. And there is the coalition that the European Union is part of, led by Canada. And Ukraine, of course, is also part of it, really full focused on the return of the children. And there is Ukraine itself that has to bring back the kids initiative. And I think all of these organizations coordinate their work, compare their information. And we need, I mean, not to say that the academia and the experts cannot perhaps not do everything, but their expertise is absolutely vital, especially in tracking those children. And I think it's a very interesting point you made, but I say that more with my previous hat as defense minister, that you could use the intelligence services of various countries to help the experts to get the knowledge that they need for eventually being able to bring the children back. Because the number of the returned children is, I mean, every child that is returned, I'm very grateful and thankful, but it's a very low number compared to the huge number of children that are missing. And we know that it's been very difficult, and often there have been sort of middlemen. There have been countries, also in the Middle East, who've been helpful to negotiate between parties. But if it is that difficult under the current circumstances, we cannot use that method for the large numbers.
Yeah, good you brought up this intelligence question, which she actually was referring to. What is EU currently doing to make sure that intelligence bodies and also maybe internal security bodies, like we have Europol, are all involved in finding, tracking, and is there such a coordination?
There is a Europol, Eurojust, and the ICC are coordinating their efforts, and they also have a database. So I think the relevant authorities are involved, but I would be interested to see if really, specific intelligence services with good positions on Russia could contribute to that. I'm sure that if it's already happening, I don't know, and if I knew, I couldn't say so. But I think it could be a relevant, added value to the.
Yeah, I think we should actually explore this value. Maybe it's something on your to-do list.
Absolutely.
And then I will take a question from there.
Maybe just a quick add-on to that. I think that could also be something that could end up in this deal of whatever form it may or may not take. Because, I mean, one thing is to demand that the children are being given back, and obviously that would be the best case, but I don't have enough trust in the Russian bureaucracy that I think that they even know how many children they've abducted and where they are. So what could also be a mechanism instead is to demand certain types of information. For example, the Russian state has given out these money packages if Russian families adopt Ukrainian children of $1,000. So there needs to be a data bank somewhere of which Russian families have received these $1,000. Like this kind of type of information to either gather through intelligence or just to make this part of a deal, I think could be crucial in terms of actually relocating as many of these children as possible.
Very briefly, because as for children who were sent to the Russian families, we have quite a lot of information because Russians themselves, they are the best documentators of their own crimes. And as of these 380 children officially mentioned by them in October 2022, sent to beloved Russian families, so we know everything about them, including their addresses, now current addresses in Russia. The only problem is that many of them, first of all, they were too young, and that is why they are now totally brainwashed, and we should be frank with ourselves and understand how we can guarantee their repatriation without violation of the child-best principle, because we should find this balance between international crime consequences and their best interests to be raised in the family, how we can legitimize this process or whether it is possible as such. So, but this was the point related to the children in families. We know also about some cases when Ukrainian children were firstly sent, for example, to Bryansk region, and in the Bryansk region they were registered as orphans from Bryansk. And that is why in this database it is very often indicated that it is not Ivan from occupied Mariupol of Donetsk Oblast, but this is Ivan from Bryansk, and that is why without photo and without specific software, it is just impossible to understand that this Ivan is abducted child from Ukraine. So we should understand that this issue is very complex, and we need a very specific support, not to duplicate some work already done, but just to go deeper and to cover more and more children. And we should do it in parallel with the process of repatriation itself. And we should negotiate with Russians that not only children, but also young adults should be returned. Because you are actually very true talking about children who maybe now are in the process to be recruited to the Russian army, at least under this regular conscription process. Yes, they are not sent to the battlefield, but at the age of 18, they should serve during 1 year. So we should return them because it is very problematic for themselves to be returned. That is why it is quite difficult.
I think you raised the bitterest question of all, what to do with brainwashed children, indeed under the principle of do not do more harm. But I think maybe we can leave this dreaming about how to do the rehabilitation of these children to the end of this panel, but I think we should take questions. Line 4, first seat first, and then last, and then third from right, so please.
Does work?
Yes.
So I'm Catherine Valinga from Canada. I'm a businesswoman CEO, so I bring that perspective. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing and for raising this important issue. Look, in business, results. Show me the results. And what I see is a lot of action, sanctions, government conferences, resolutions, but at the end of the day, I'm looking at there are organizations, NGOs, that are getting results. Canada, we had an underground railroad. There's the Rainbow Railroad. There's an underground railroad that exists to get these children from Russia now. And what they're limited by is money. $10,000 a child. That's what it takes for getting them out, the ones that want to, that connect to full 6 to 12 months. Kateryna's organization is likely needs money. That's how we can help in the West. We have money. They know what they're doing, and it's so, I guess it's for me, the question is, why are these organizations and NGOs on their goddamn knees when they're getting the results, And why are we in Europe and Canada talking about it, looking like heroes, wearing, Belgian Prime Minister with his children, save the children, stop the... Why are we doing that and not just giving them the money they need to get the results?
Well, who wants to respond to that? It's true, and indeed many institutions have legal issues and problems, and one way of how children are got back are actually, that the parents agree to the deal on the other side, but those are only those who have the resources themselves. It's of course a huge legal problem to overcome there, but what could be done? What do you think?
It was for the...
Yeah.
I don't want to shock you, but my idea is that the strategy to do the same with more money will not work. Because the main and the biggest problem now is the total absence of the Russian political will to return these abducted children. For most, because they are witnessing Russian crimes every day, and they can contribute to the cases in the ICC. And that is why during all these public processes, when there is participation of the mediators, we see mostly cases of reunification of families where there was no crime. Because Russians are selecting who to return and who not to return. Without fixing this thing, any money will not work. I am not encouraging you not to support Ukrainian non-governmental organizations with resources. Of course, we need them, and I would like to tell you that maybe organizations who are directly involved in the process of repatriation, like Save Ukraine or Ukrainian Child Rights Network, need this money the most. But we should understand where are these issues and how we can solve them. And also, allow me to disagree with you in the context of this public manifestation from many prominent people, politicians, but not exclusively, when they are trying to keep pushing Russians to remember that these children are not forgotten. And we will do the same for the next years, just in order to be sure that at least some children will see it, despite all limits to free internet access in Russia, and will understand that we are waiting for them. And this is also related to rehabilitation and reintegration strategy, because Russians are trying to persuade them that no one needs you in Ukraine.
Yeah. You are not
But
missed.
they are needed not only in Ukraine, but in 46 countries of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children, so our supporters. That is why, sometimes money cannot decide some problems, at least in this case.
But I think also we discussed with Kajsa yesterday ourselves this helplessness feeling, which paradoxically, while international law is developing, new categories added and so on, enforcement is missing. So in this sense, we share your frustration. But all of us who know, you don't, but all of us others here and many in the room know what does it mean, the Russian bardak. And that means that the system is corrupt. And indeed, you can find always someone in the system who will accept your 10,000 and return a given child. But you cannot build a system on that, unfortunately. Yes, it's not doable. Yeah. But this is what is going on. Actually, quite a lot. Let's be honest. It's also going on, and I think the end justifies the means here. But you cannot make a policy of that. We had a question there. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Irina Fedorenko. And I am an artist, and also I'm from Mariupol. And I know this topic from inside, my relatives, my friends, and I know what is stolen children. And during these 4 years, as an artist, I'm working with the topic of children. I put few paintings because today I also have an exhibition in another location here. just to show it quickly. And during these 4 years, these paintings was almost in 100 exhibitions in different countries. And as I understood, people still didn't understood how deep is this topic. For politics, they have their questions, what they discuss. For people from business, they discuss their topics. But just people, children, I want to say a big thank you for what are you doing, and I hope that we will have results. Thank you.
Thank you. Art is such a powerful tool. I remember last year or the year before here in the Yes, we were showing the pictures of and small clips of the children who had been returned. And probably for me that was the most kind of humble moment of this war, to see those successful. But unfortunately, you're so right. There are far more many who need to be saved. There was another question in that. Please come forward.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all your hard work. Kateryna, thank you for your testimony at the UN. So my name is Eric Gabady. I'm the chair of Save Ukraine. What was referred to as the $10,000 is not for bribery, but Save Ukraine has now rescued 500 children during 2025. 1,000 of the 2,000 have been rescued. 1,100 actually have been rescued by Save Ukraine. 90% of the last children who've been rescued have been by Save Ukraine. It's as you described it well, there's a bifurcation of the issue. First, every child we can get out is super important. Our goal this year is to rescue 1,000. It's not a lot. We need to consider the true captured children, as Kateryna has explained, which is the 1 million or so children in occupied territories. But it's still a very large effort, and it's an effort which should get supported. In terms of the legal structure, Save Ukraine is also the ones who are the primary evidence gathering. As the children are brought through Belarus, the government will capture some, but unsurprisingly, for many of the children who suffered such tremendous trauma, it's 45 to 90 days post-rescue when they really start revealing many of the horrible things that they endured. And Save Ukraine's that spot. What I wanted to mention is that I think, as you've correctly stated, it's not necessarily identifying the children. We have many identified children. The process of what happens next is what's really important. And it's not just the immediate, it's that longer term. When we think of the Jews post the Holocaust, it was generations before people were identified and self-identified to find their way home. That's a problem, that's a human rights problem, that's multi-generational. A new Iron Curtain has descended across Europe. It's right through Ukraine. And we have to be in a place to capture that information and have processes in place for that generational return. It's not going to happen with whatever my esteemed president might be doing right now, but it's going to be generational. And so I think having processes and systems in place for that reintegration, for that pathway, and there was something that was done in the 70s called the right of return. When Soviet Jews had a pathway out of Russia, that right of return resonated with people around the world. That's what we should be providing for Ukrainians, not just the children, but Ukrainians to have a right to return to Ukraine, and especially children. So if there is a way to enable the EU to take leadership on that capturing of information of Ukrainians that are in the occupied territories, of having a way to have that pathway back, of having that generational database where people can say, I didn't know I was Ukrainian, and find their way home, that would be a tremendous, tremendous aid. And then, as was stated, right now, it's about 10 grand to get a kid out. The more 10 grands we get, the more kids are going to get out one way or the other. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the work which is being done right now, and thank you also for really looking into this beautiful future when Ukraine is member of the European Union, because indeed then these questions of repatriation, do you have the right to settle as a EU citizen, will come forward. This is the beautiful future which I believe we all think will happen one day. But let's start step to step, I mean, about this rehabilitation. Who wants to map out what is currently being done to help these children? What is European Union ready to do to provide support and help? Because of course mental health help is specifically scarce in Ukraine. I mean, everybody, I would say most people there probably need it. How to now, I mean, make sure that the children who have gotten back, and let's say a year later, 2 years later, their parents notice, or the children start to speak, as you said, they don't start immediately, that there is something astray, something's really seriously wrong. What are the measures which currently Ukraine can offer, and what's the hope for the European Union? I mean, who wants to come from this point? Yeah.
Okay, I will start. So Ukraine as a state has already built the whole system, logistics, for children repatriated from Russia and from the occupied territories. It means that each and every child is interviewed by special people, commissioners, who are trying to understand their unique needs and their personal situation, but not only the situation of this specific child, but the situation of the whole family, because when we are talking about social support, other services, we should understand that they are provided not to one child from the family, but to the family as such. So we have 3 reintegration packages and also 50,000 of hryvnias in order to support this child and also young adults returning from the Russian control. We have also established even the system of providing some legal support, and not only in the context of renewing, for example, some personal documents, but also in the context to support processes at the national and international level. For example, my organization, we are representing these children in the United Nations treaty bodies, including the United Nations Human Rights Committee. Also, we are interviewing them in order to submit new communications to the International Criminal Court, related not only to unlawful deportation, but also to other crimes under the Rome Statute. We are also trying to contribute to the process of receiving compensation by these children using the infrastructure of the International Register for Damage, now Complaint Commission. So everything is done. The only problem is that mostly all resources, they are invested to Kyiv and to Kyiv region. But we understand that children are also returning and residing in other regions of Ukraine, in the west of Ukraine, for example. And that is why we should also attract, there was a question about money, so maybe money is needed also in other regions. And I would like to highlight that it is not only about abducted children or brainwashed children returned from occupation. This is for all children affected by war in Ukraine, because it is impossible to return all abducted children without DI reform in Ukraine, because children orphans cannot be returned to orphanages, they are returned to families. Also, it is impossible to provide some services only to these specific families with returned children and not to all families in the same legal situation. So just to understand that while we are helping these children, we are also ameliorating the situation of others. And maybe it is also not only at the Ukrainian national level, but also at the international level, because Ukraine is not a problem. Ukrainian children is not a problem. This is a part of the solution.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you that Ukrainians have done a lot to create the system. But I mean, being myself an Eastern European, I know that the ratio of child psychologists and psychiatrists is roughly 20 specialists per 1 million people. So I think indeed, I mean, a lot can be done by the West here to help Ukrainians out. And so Kajsa.
And I think especially on the numbers game, because you need much more expertise, which is why it's so important that the EU is there already on the ground with experts that can help to train for this. And I think we also must be aware of the huge task that not only lies ahead of Ukraine, you're already doing it, because the children is an extremely important and difficult group to deal with and for the reintegration. But there are also the veterans, which is a huge group. There are also the people who've come back who've been prisoners of war. There are the people who've been illegally detained who will be able to return to Ukraine. So there are various groups. So this expertise and the numbers of people that you need to have available in Ukraine is really huge. So that requires funding, expertise from the European Union side. And we're already doing it. I think we're constantly talking to Ukraine to see what else should be done, could be done, and must be done.
Could, for example, we imagine that from Eastern European nations where you still have, I mean, millions of Russian-speaking people, because after all, I mean, taking them to seek help in UK or Germany wouldn't help that much, whereas in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, I mean, and all these Eastern nations, you have many people who speak the language actually. So we are very much looking forward to the Commission making a call for us to, I mean, great, you can provide us the resources, but I think we are all capable of finding people who fit the criteria of speaking the language, because you cannot help a child in another language, I think you want.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point there. And I would also like to stress again that it's not just about the children that got abducted. There was a 2024 study that showed 43% of all Ukrainian children are showing signs of trauma and psychological distress. And there is something different about experiencing trauma as a child with a developing brain and as an adult. So I think we also need to make sure still to not throw adults that experience trauma in its many ways, including veterans, into the same category as children, just because physiologically the effects are different. And the point here is that's going to be a generational task. So we need mental health and psychological support immediately, and Ukraine's on it, but we need it long term. And I think that's where it becomes an investment in a generation, an investment in the future. Make being a psychologist a really attractive job. Make sure that's a job that's great to have. Trauma therapy, especially on a societal level, also needs to be culturally sensitive. So we can't just import trauma measures that were developed in Germany and just implant them in Ukraine. That's not going to work. It's a completely different setup, completely different also historical and intergenerational trauma that takes place there. So I think my call would be to also understand this as an opportunity to reshape the way that society deals with trauma and the strength and resilience that already is there, but that can also come from that for the next 20, 30, 50, or even 100 years.
Yeah, I agree with you very much there, but I also think that we need to differentiate between children and the grown-ups, and for one main psychological reason. Kids don't know that what happened to them, domestic violence, rape in the worst case, is not the life. They have no other experience. And all children growing up in military conflict, I mean, they have totally different needs from the grown-ups who basically are helped by the fact if the world says this was wrong, what happened to you, whereas kids cannot. So even if there is a cultural element, I'm quite sure there is also a big part of knowledge in humankind on how to actually help these children for whom this is the only life which they've seen and known, and I'm quite sure that Ukrainians can be supported by external specialists on that. So I think Europe can take a bigger role there and then try to help this way these kids. Yeah. Do we have any more questions, comments from the auditorium?
Thank you. I'm Albin Sela, CEO of Defense Company from the Netherlands. I have actually a question. I would like to ask if you can make some examples of how the Russians, or what techniques the Russians use to indoctrinate kids and to Russify them, and especially how can these techniques and tools be used with social media platforms to also extend the influence into Europe, to our children and also to our adults, let's say.
So we should understand that some of grave violations committed against children during armed conflicts, they are not only for Ukrainian occupied territories, or they are committed not only against Ukrainian children abducted by Russians, but against children under Ukrainian control, and also against children who fled Ukraine because of the Russian aggression, and they are now in Europe. Unfortunately, there were cases already recorded in Poland and in Czech Republic when Russian FSB agents were trying to recruit to use. It was actually the use of kids from the legal standpoint. So to use these children in order to commit some illegal actions and in order to undermine this solidarity and support towards the Ukrainian nation and towards these people from Ukraine in the states of the European Union. So yes, in order to do it, they are using social networks, including Telegram, TikTok, and others. And of course, I don't have a simple answer to this big challenge, because it is not only for Ukrainian children, it is in general for children in this new era. But I would like to tell you that it is a big opportunity for the international community to sit together and to try to shape the new international regulations to be sufficient enough and efficient enough to protect children worldwide. Because Russians are not very creative. They are using the same strategies already used in other armed conflicts. Maybe the scale is much more bigger, but crimes are not very unique. And that is why we should change or die, yes? So change these international regulations or rethink it, or Russians will do it together with their peers and partners today.
If I may also add, I'm only a moderator, but I come from a country which is doing quite a strong, counter work to Russian strategic communication, and we have the systems in place which follow closely also online developments to discover the groups where Russian propaganda is going on. And it is very important for us also in this children's context, because after all, 5% of Estonian people who currently live in our country are now Ukrainians, and they have children who go to school, and it's very easy to indoctrinate, these children with shifting the blame. You shift the blame that, these people currently in Kiev, it's their fault that you have to live in this country and learn this extremely difficult Pen-Ugric language now. It's their fault. And indeed, if your country is in general strong in standing up against Russian Stratcom, you are probably strong there as well. But we know that, there are many, many children in Europe, in the countries which are not like Balts and Poles and Finns, who are able to detect, discover, and take countermeasures. We are sending people out for doing Russian propaganda online if they are not citizens of our country. And this is, I think, what should be done actually everywhere. So if anybody wants to learn from Baltic practices, then please turn to us. And I think this is something which needs to happen at a larger scale, and using this experience to, explain to everybody else in Europe that things can be done. It's not like social media is there and we cannot do anything about that. Westerns have their problems with Andrew Tate. Now we have this problem with many Andrusha Titovs probably there, and we really need to, share this experience.
If I can add one thing also to reply to your question, is that I think, first of all, also thank you for doing what you do as an artist, because giving the children a face is very important. So talking about, we owe it also to those children and to their families to talk about them and to be there and to know that we have that to show that we've not forgotten them, even if we cannot reach them. So thank you for that. But to your question, I think we also have, in our communication about this, have to be very concrete, and also to say, so what is actually happening is that 3-year-old kids are getting sort of patriotic education. And it's impossible to resist that as a child, because you don't know. So from then on, it becomes increasingly difficult and more difficult for that child ever to have the possibility to sort of reintegrate or return to his actual roots, surroundings, community, family, whatever. And also the militarization part, I think, is really quite shocking. Relatively young children in camps with Russian military people. And all of this, you use the word brainwashing, and that is exactly what is happening.
We have roughly 20 seconds per capita here to maybe say one last thing, and I would formulate it this way: what not to do. While trying to help, what not to do. What should Europe not do, and what should the international community definitely not do? If you can think of anything, please let us know.
Never consider crimes and violence against children as a soft issue that can be an afterthought. but see it as the strategic priority that Russia and other destabilizing actors see it as.
Very beautiful.
Not to be afraid to call the crimes by their proper names. I started with this point. So this is the war not for territories, but for people sharing the same identity and values. And the Russians are depriving Ukraine of its future with one unique goal, just to stop our existence. And this is a genocide. And if it is genocide, so the international community should react properly.
Genocide without dead bodies is what you are telling.
Yes.
Kajsa, please.
No impunity. I think this is, as I said in the beginning, any ceasefire peace agreement, number one point is return the children. And we can never accept any situation where there would be some kind of amnesty for these crimes that they have committed.
Thank you, and we are now out of time. We have tried to be in time and, let's say, moderate about our possibilities and achievements, maybe differently from some previous speakers in this day, in this town. Thank you for being patient with us.
Thank you so much.